Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of an American Discussion Podcast. I'm your host, Drew, with my co-host, Michael. Mike, how are we doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Gearing up for the next and last few days of this election cycle. Ready to be done looking at all these political ads. Finally get my regular old pharmaceutical ads back on YouTube.
Oh, of course. I thought you were going to say gearing up for deer season. I know you already got a deer this year, but, it's coming up quick.
Yeah, I'm already geared for deer season. All I got to do is wash my clothes and repack my bag.
Yeah, I went out. So between our last recording and now, I went and picked up my new rifle that we've talked about. And when I went and picked it up, the nice young man that helped me mount the new scope on it and get it all put together from the box, he forgot to put the magazine in the box when I left, and I was too distracted by making sure I got all the parts and pieces for the two scopes that I had, juggling in my hands, were in the in my bag, that I didn't even realize that the magazine wasn't in there. So I ended up having to drive all the way back, and it's almost a 45-minute drive each way. So went back there today.
Yeah, picking it up though. Okay.
And they had a pretty nice sale, 35% off on Blaze Orange. So I upgraded all my gear, all my nice outer layer gear. The Blaze Orange, the hat, the vest, the gloves.
I think I'm going to get a vest this year. I don't think I've ever hunted with a vest, but I think I'm going to this year.
Yeah, per our state regulations, when you're hunting in a rifle season, at least, you have to have a minimum square inches cover of Blaze Orange, and a hunting vest covers that all on its own. But most people recommend the gloves and the hat just to add a little bit more visibility, especially because you normally have your hand up if you're if you have it on your gun, and your head, obviously, the part you want to protect the most. So
I've never been a huge fan of it, but mainly because it has all that reflective shit on it, typically. Or at least a lot of what I see. And just because deer can't see orange doesn't mean they can't see reflecting light in a manufactured straight line.
Yeah, no, totally fair. I didn't see anything with reflectors or any kind of reflective tape on it. It was all just, solid, pretty good. The vest that I got actually has some padded shoulders, which
a man of your stature needs.
Yeah, especially after we talked about the recoil of the rifle that I bought. It'll at least help out a little bit with target shooting before season.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what have you been up to?
Not a whole lot. I mean, work. I got some leaves pushed around. I just borrowed my buddy's backpack leaf blower, so I'm gonna finish cleaning my yard because I got probably maybe 10 square yards on two 5-amp hour DeWalt batteries on my blower, just because of the sheer volume of leaves. So my buddy used to own a landscaping company, so he let me borrow one of his that he had when he sold it. So I'm gonna get that done tomorrow and see if I can't slide into the lumber mill, pick up some lumber, and yeah, that's pretty much my only plans. I know we got the wife's birthday dinner tomorrow night.
Oh, very nice.
When are you taking that gun to the range?
Should be either tomorrow or Sunday. I have to call tomorrow morning, make sure they have availability, but I'm planning on tomorrow. They don't do reservations like online or anything. First come, first serve, so I just want to make sure that everything's good to go. They don't have any kind of range restrictions, anything like that. So
where is it at?
It's a local one near me. There's actually 3 or 4 ranges that have 100-yard rifle ranges out. So
you know what they're rated for?
I do not. I'm shooting a pretty low power rifle as far as that goes. So as long as they have a rifle range, I assume that as long as you're not shooting like a Barrett 50 cal or something, a
450 is almost 50 caliber, right?
Yeah, I do. But if you're allowed to shoot 308 or 30-06, the actual power of the round itself isn't that incredibly much more, especially with the straight wall cartridge diminishing at range.
Yeah.
And if you can shoot muzzle loaders out there, there's no way to restrict your grain load on a muzzle loader.
You could do it if you only allowed pellet system,
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, you either have to do the honor system or have somebody visually verify that you're loading a certain amount of powder into your weapon, which I have never experienced. But you can get a 300 grain load in a muzzle loader, and that's well beyond what I'm shooting out there.
So I'm looking up some stats between a 450 and a 308 real quick. So on average, you're looking around 2600 FPS with a 450, and depending on the ammunition type, with a 308 you can get anywhere from 2800 to 2200 FPS for the 308. But interestingly enough, it also says it has the 450 has a 24 foot-pounds of recoil, where the 308 only has 20 foot-pounds. So there's a slight difference there. In the context, a 450 Bushmaster is showing, at least according to this ammo.com website, which I don't know the rationality here, but it seems actually pretty congruent with my weapon knowledge. It says it only has 3 foot-pounds less of free recoil than a 2 3/4 slug on a 12 gauge. So 1 ounce slug, that is.
So that's pretty similar to what we were talking about the other day. Offline, kind of like a 12 gauge slug. So I think that's probably pretty typical, but I'll do some more research, and like I said, I'm gonna give them a call on the phone, make sure everything's kosher before I just show up and try and start shooting at their range. Obviously I want to respect their rules and be safe, and I'll probably be wearing that blaze orange shooting vest, with my hearing protection and all of that. Just make sure I'm comfortable with what I'm going to be wearing. Probably won't be wearing my muffs on hunting day, but I'll probably have my at least one of my earplugs in while I'm out there.
Yeah. Did you pick up a box of ammo for your 450?
I did. I picked up 2 different boxes of ammo.
Hit me with them.
Just to see, I don't have them right here in front of me, but they had slightly different powder loads and different manufacturers. Again, not a huge gun guy. I was about to say gun nut, but I'm not a...
That doesn't bother me.
Not like super into, the different types of guns and ammo. I tend to just do some research before I go out and do stuff. When I bought the ammo, I didn't have time to do research, so I just picked 2, one on the lower end of the price range and one kind of mid-range of the price range. So we'll see how they do.
So one thing I'll tell you, and this is going to be important for accuracy, which I think is very important, particularly for how ethical a shot is. Make sure that whatever ammunition you use to zero your weapon is the same ammunition you use to shoot at the deer. Mainly because different ammunitions have different ballistic coefficients and different ballistic traits, so they fly at different speeds. Different the round at the end, the bullet itself, not obviously the cartridge, but just the bullet at the tip is going to fly at different speeds. It's going to have different weights, so it's going to shoot differently. It's not going to be markedly different inside. It's not going to be different at all inside 50 yards. You're not going to see much difference until you, with a 450, you'll probably start seeing distance around 150, 200 yards. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think the max effective range for a 450 is 250 or 300 yards. So.
Yeah, I think 200
just because it's such a broad
recommended round. Like the recommended, stay within 200 yards. Yeah. But my plan was basically to shoot maybe 5 of each round at the target, see which one I like better.
How many come in a box?
20, and then from there sight it in with whichever one I prefer.
You're likely going to want to pick up whatever one you decide you like more. You're probably going to want to pick up another box of that, because you want to do, I would say, 3-shot minimum groupings for 0, but 5 would be ideal. So obviously aim at the same spot, shoot 5 rounds. Whatever your grouping is, adjust based off that. Shoot 5 more rounds. Adjust until you get it dialed in. Until you're essentially fucking keyholing. And then you still want to have a couple rounds for hunting. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. No, that's great advice. I'll probably take it out to the range twice before deer season, and then you and I will get out there and hopefully put in some work.
Yeah, and depending on what time we get there Thursday, I think my parent-teacher conference is 11:30. So that'll probably be down around noon if I had to guess. I can't imagine a preschool parent-teacher conference is going to be too intensive.
Oh no, ours was 15 minutes. So
yeah. So I figure we'll do that, and then I'll leave right after we get home, and the school's like 5 minutes away. So I'll probably be out of here around 12:15. That'll put me up north around 2:30, 3 o'clock. I figure at that point you and I can go and do a walk through the woods. You can get some gear staged if you want, or at least pick out a spot in daylight. And then if we can find a range out there, maybe we'll go out and blast. I'll bring the AR. We can go have some fun.
Yeah, that would be great. I would definitely like that. We can have a little fun out on the range, and kind of compare, give some notes, and mostly you giving me notes. But
I was like, I'd love to see the notes that you give me. Hey, it's pretty warm in here.
My notes will all be opinion based.
Not based on shooting, just
definitely not.
I don't like the molding they chose for the crown molding in this room.
Yeah, man, why is this range set up this way? This is weird. You would, for like ergonomics, you would want this and that. But yeah, anyway, did you have a good Halloween?
Yeah, we met a bunch of our neighbors that we really haven't talked to much. I went out after honey harvest and dropped off some honey to a couple of my neighbors that were home, and then last night we met pretty much everyone in the immediate vicinity, which was nice. Took the kids out. They had a ball. They got a whole hoard of candy. Tape fell over 9 times. So it was good.
Yeah, no, that's great.
What about you guys?
We went out and met up with my sister-in-law and her 2 kids, and just kind of cruised around one of the neighborhoods near us. We didn't go through our neighborhood specifically, but one a few streets down that had a little better, sidewalk accessibility, and everybody had a lot of fun. So, yeah, got some good pictures, good memories, and the kids had a lot of fun hanging out with their cousins.
Nice. So you guys did a whole group thing, huh?
Yep. Just
nice.
The 4 kids and 4 adults. So, what's that?
Did your mom make it out?
Oh no, she didn't. She's she's getting up there in age, not really one for running around and keeping up with a ton of kids all at the same time.
How old is your mom? I guess I never really knew that.
She's in her 50s now, but
Oh, okay.
different people have different mobility and lifestyle. Oh, yeah. So definitely not the most agile person these days, but she definitely loves the kids. So but yeah, anyway, we should probably start getting into the topic.
Yeah.
So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about Election Day. Election Day is coming up. By the time this episode goes out, it's probably going to be just before Election Day. So I wanted to talk about the history of Election Day and a little bit about early and absentee voting. They're all kind of combined. I wanted to do just kind of the history of early and absentee voting, and then that wrapped me into what is Election Day, what's allowed, what's not allowed. So I'm going to try and kind of breeze over it because I know we want to get to a little bit of a state of the race. That way we have one last topical one before Election Day, and then I think our plan is to record either on Election Day, like election night, or the next day following that, so that we have a pretty good idea of where the votes are going to lay and how it's all going to shake out, pending any potential disputes there. So I want to start off with kind of the history of Election Day itself. So the original Constitution verbiage, right, basically said that it falls to the states to come up with a method of making the federal elections. So each state chooses their presidential electors, and the way that they do that is totally up to them. So up until the late 1700s, it was from what I can tell basically like a 30-day or so period where they could do elections and choose and send in their electors at any time. So any state could, do whatever they wanted with their elections and send in their electors anytime in like a month period, basically. So as communication spread and our methods of communication got better, it became clear that we needed a better system because, say if Ohio voted in early November and Michigan voted in late November, word of Ohio's vote was going to get to Michigan before their election. So the federal government passed a law in 1875, and I'll read that verbatim. The Tuesday next after the first Monday in November in every even-numbered year is established as the day for the election in each of the states. And then Congress commencing on the third day of January next thereafter. So what that means in practice is that becomes the second Tuesday in November. So the reason that they didn't pick Monday or a Thursday or anything like that is that they wanted it to be essentially a week or within the first week of November, but they didn't want it to fall on November 1st. So that's for two reasons. One being that it is All Saints' Day for many Christians, and the second and most important, I would say, is that it's also the day that businesses do all of their billing. So they're catching up on all of their accounts for the month. Anybody that's worked anywhere that interfaced with their billing department knows that those guys are so busy on the first of the month. So that is why Election Day was chosen. So if you'll notice, when I read out the actual verbiage of the bill, it's very general. So when we get into early and absentee voting, it doesn't specifically prohibit votes before that. It doesn't say all votes must be cast on this day. It just says that the election shall be held on that day. So early voting and absentee voting are allowed, but most states interpret that to mean that you cannot declare the votes until Election Day. States cannot declare the votes until Election Day. However, most states interpret that to mean that they cannot count the votes until Election Day. So the way that it works in most states for early voting is that you feed your vote into the same machine that they will use on Election Day. So all of those votes get counted at the same time. So on Election Day, you will have your early vote and Election Day votes counted concurrently, basically. However, some states for absentee voting say that they can't even unseal the absentee votes until Election Day happens, which is why we've seen in the past some really strange things with absentee votes getting counted late, and then specifically with the 2020 election, as we've talked about in the past, you had the absentee votes getting counted after the fact, and the in-person and early votes were counted ahead of time. So it kind of it made that red mirage that people like to talk about.
Yeah.
So for early voting, I could not find very good information about the history of early voting in the limited amount of time that I had to research this.
So I have some information on that, if you're interested.
Okay, well, I'll just say that the earliest that I could find was that Florida actually was the earliest that I could find that implemented early voting, and that was in 2004, with more states coming within that 2004 to mid 20-teens period. So if you have something different than that, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so technically, and this might get into absentee voting, because I feel like absentee voting is early voting, in my opinion. You've already voted. before election day.
So what I mean by when I talk about early voting, I mean early in-person voting. Sorry, I should have made that distinction.
Gotcha.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, well, if you're going to get back into the history of absentee voting, then I guess I got nothing else to say.
No. If you have some info on this, I would love to hear it from you, so that I'm not just talking by myself here for 30 minutes.
Yeah. So I don't have my sources on this. I wasn't prepared for this topic. I just know I looked into it late last week or mid last week, whenever we were talking about offline about absentee voting and all that. So basically, it's been happening since the early 1800s, absentee voting. However, historically, it's been primarily for military members that were away from home, right? Whether that be they were stationed somewhere in the South during conflict there, or if they're stationed abroad, or whatever, or even if they're on the front lines in a different state. A lot of times we don't think of states being that big, but before the automobile, they definitely were. So it was mainly reserved for the military, though. And then I believe it was in the 70s. I could be wrong on this, on the date. They started to open it up to regular civilians regularly. I know there was a random time drop in the middle of that where they allowed it regularly for like a short period of time, but that kind of went away. But it has been something that's been around almost as long as our country, as far as absentee ballots go. So yeah, there's that.
That's a great kind of introduction to the topic here. So, like you said, the absentee voting began during the Civil War. So, soldiers that were on the front lines during the Civil War were afforded the ability to vote, and then that carried on for the military. And then as early as the late 1800s, they were allowing United States citizens that were abroad or in different states to vote with an excuse. So as long as they provided some kind of excuse to their state government, they were allowed to vote absentee, so mail in their choices for federal elections.
So just to
in
most states, I think that I think that makes the most sense for this whole thing. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think that having an excuse is what it should be because of things we discussed earlier on this as well. That I'll get into, but I do just want to highlight that. As you said, it was with excuse. It was not, hey, if you want to not come to a polling location and just mail your ballot and then you can.
Yeah, so I believe the first state to authorize absentee voting with no restrictions was Oregon, and then at present most states allow absentee voting with no excuse. So I'm
not sure that you look specifically into why, but I have a feeling, and I actually recall this from the time, that COVID is actually what changed a lot of that.
Yes, so COVID did bring it up to the majority, but prior to that, many states, I want to say it was in the 20s, had some form of absentee voting with no excuse. I could be wrong. I'm looking through my references here, and I don't see the specific stats that I was looking at when I saw that, but one thing that I did want to highlight was that the absentee voting, as a whole was really the first thing that came about, and then early in-person voting happened very recently. So in the new millennium, so within the last 20 years, we've seen that early in-person voting. And prior to that, everybody got in line on election day, and with the last several presidential elections, we've seen some big problems with that, which led to the rise of early voting. For instance, Ohio in 2004 had extremely long lines in some polling centers, so much that the Supreme Court of Ohio had to grant an emergency order to extend voting hours and actually push it into the next day. So after that, Ohio opened up early voting so that people could vote in person early to alleviate some of those long lines. And I think that's just kind of a logistics issue, and it makes sense from a voter rights aspect as well. Like, give them multiple days that they can go out just to make sure that they can get time off work when it works for their schedule. Not everybody can be available on specifically a Tuesday. Sometimes a Monday or a Thursday works better for certain people, or even a weekend. My wife was just out at our local library today. For context, it's a Friday, but she said the voting line was longer than she has ever seen a voting line, and it was early voting in just one precinct. So it definitely opens up a little bit more of an option for people that do want to vote, and I'm definitely in support of it. And I do like the early in-person voting because it maintains the same kind of scrutiny for election day voting, and if you're feeding your ballot into the tabulator, it's available basically on demand on election day. So the absentee voting, some of those laws that we kind of brushed on that make it so that states cannot count the votes until election day. That's based on kind of some outdated information based on hand counts, as far as I can tell, where they wanted to have all of the ballots in hand to count them all at the same time. They didn't want any kind of cross-contamination with old votes and new votes and votes getting double counted and all of that, whereas now basically every state has a very similar form of voting where there's a serial number with every ballot, and that gets cross-referenced in the tabulation system, and even if you feed the same vote in 5 times, that's only going to count it once. So based on all of that, one thing I did want to bring up really quick is the prevalence of early voting in the United States. So early voting was not very prevalent. It was kind of on an upward slope from kind of 10% to 20%, and then in the 2020 election it was right around 60% of the vote came in from early voting in one way or the other, either absentee or early in-person voting. And I think that this election is actually going to be even more than the last election, based on the unprecedented number of people that we've seen in line for early voting almost in every state. breaking records almost on a daily basis. So with that, I kind of want to open the floor to you to, kind of give any additional context that you might have and any opinions on that. With that, have at it.
Yeah, so I think that the original purpose for absentee voting in particular was a good thing. I don't think that early voting is inherently a bad thing. If we're talking just a day or two before, just to kind of free up time at the polls, that way it's not so crowded, and like you said, if people can get access to them, maybe they can't get certain days off, maybe companies won't let everybody go early because everybody wants to vote, or whatever the case is, it really opens up for that opportunity. I don't really see a problem with that. I'm sure one can be presented to me that I would change my mind, potentially, but as of right now, I don't see a problem with that. Absentee voting, you and I have already discussed this. I tend to not be a fan. I think that it really distances the actual act of what you're doing from the reality, right? So what I mean by that is I think that a lot of things we have, there's very few things that we have to do as Americans, right? Die and pay taxes. Now, there's certain things that we absolutely should do. I consider these to be called civic duties. Jury duty is an example of this. Voting is an example of this. I think being a decent person really is, but I guess some people would disagree with me on that. But I think that when you allow absentee voting, it's a lot like social media, in my opinion, right? Not in the same manner, with the same outcome, but the same premises behind it, where we all know somebody who, in real life, they're a nice person. They might be a little shy or a little confrontation adverse, right? But then on Facebook, you just see them trashing people all day long, talking shit to everybody, things along that nature. And that's because there's a disconnect. There's no personal involvement with that. With the social media one, it's because you're not in the same room as the person, so there are no physical ramifications of that. But I also think it just kind of gamifies it, and it makes it like sending out anything else, right? I think voting should have you should have to go to the poll. You should have to stand in line with your fellow Americans. You should have to be engaged in this civic duty with everybody else. It's something that I think would pull us together as Americans. And it's good to be in the same place with people that you don't agree with. And you're forced to do that at polling locations, where you're not in almost any other form of life, right? Short of government buildings where, like, Secretary of State or something, or DMV, if that's what it's called in your state. That's pretty much the only place you have to be around Americans you disagree with. And I tend to think that's a good thing. I think the further we distance ourselves from people that we disagree with, the easier it is to demonize them, the easier it is to treat them like filth, essentially.
Yeah, so I can definitely see what you're saying there. Now, I do have a couple of counterpoints to that, and I'll start out with a little bit of context to say that most of my voting has been in person. I have voted twice by absentee ballot. I was just living in Washington, one of the few states that allows early absentee voting with no excuse, and has for quite a while, even before the COVID pandemic. So during the pandemic, for both the general and midterm election, I voted absentee. But for the most part, I've always stood in line and, voted that way. Now, what I will say is I have never, in any of the time that I've stood in line, ever talked to anyone about who they were voting for, or had any kind of interaction, politically while I'm in line. But of course, our election system. Well, I just want to say our election system is kind of designed with that in mind, right? Like, everything is secretive. You don't know who people are voting for, 100%. And you're incentivized not to talk about who you're voting for to maintain 100%. That privacy, right? So
my point on that, to push back to my previous, because this is obviously in response to me saying being surrounded by people you don't agree with, I presume at least. That being said, you also know that there's a very high potential that there are people there that you disagree with their vote of choice, right? So even if you're not discussing it, you're in a situation where I'm sure you're passionate about how you vote or who you vote for, and a lot of other people are passionate about who they vote for, and those two things can be in conflict, and we can all still remain civil.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
You know what I mean? I think that's important,
and that's
to occur in society.
As we like to talk about, that's the entire purpose of this podcast. You and I talking about things. I would say both of us are a little bit center of, where the polar political opposites are right now, but we definitely disagree on a lot of things, but we can find a lot of common ground when we actually talk about it, and we do tend to agree on a lot of things. Now, one other point that I did want to make is that when I voted absentee, I found myself taking a lot longer to fill out a ballot than when I voted in person. And part of that was because I could do research on the fly on especially the down ballot votes. You do generally get some kind of a voter information guide mailed to you with information about those down ballot candidates, but sometimes it's hard to find anything further than just that little blurb, especially when it's a non-partisan, say county clerk position, or some of the judiciary, and certain districts have some crazy elected positions like county coroner and all kinds of stuff like that. So just being able to do a little bit of extra research and not clog up your voting booths, it definitely helps out, because you can spend as much time as much time as you want in the voting booth in person, but when there's a mile long line, you do feel a little bit of pressure to kind of hurry it up.
100%.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
But another thing I want to say on that is, with your on-the-fly research, you don't have to do on-the-fly research. I know the state of Michigan has this, and a lot of other states. I want to say the majority, but I'm sure it's not all. We've been able to see the ballot since voter registration started in Michigan. If you go on the Secretary of State, the voter portal, the same way that you register to vote or to check your registration status, right at the top, it literally you can literally click on the ballot, and it'll show you the entire ballot that you'll be voting on in the next election. Michigan is not specific. That's not specific to the primaries. They also do it midterms. They do it for local elections. Any ballot that you have coming up that you can vote on, you can see it well in advance to do that research on your own, and the sanctity and privacy of your own home. So
that is true, and that's one thing I learned about this year, and I didn't really have the opportunity to take advantage of it. But again, great point. That's something that I think people should be more aware of, to do a little bit more research. However, especially in a year like this and the last general election, I feel like people are a little bit distracted with the vote for president and not so much even, I would argue, the votes for their senators, representatives, and then, go down the list. State senators, state representatives, and especially when you get down to your local school boards and university regents and all of that kind of stuff, it's a little bit more difficult to have the bandwidth, I would say, to do research on all of that. And You are allowed to leave those blank, and I will say I did leave a few boxes blank, as I normally do, because, especially when it's just two names, you don't know anything about them. I feel like it's a disservice to vote for one randomly, you know what I mean? So...
Yeah, I feel like that's... Voting randomly often is the same as voting straight ticket, in my opinion. And as a libertarian, I rarely do that because there's usually only about 4 options on the 18-option ballot that actually has libertarian running for it. So
yeah, I was going to say, even as somebody that generally aligns with the Democratic Party in the last few years, I do not vote straight ticket. I think it's dumb to do that, just because, like, if you don't do your research, there's all kinds of spoiler candidates and people that are voting or registered as a Republican or Democrat, but in reality they don't necessarily reflect your values. So you have to do at least a little bit of research.
I think it's dumb because it ends with it leads to shitty politicians staying in office for too long, where they just keep getting voted in, because they're the familiar name, or because they're that party and that maybe that whatever municipality we're talking about for the vote, whether it be a national senator, state congressman, fucking county clerk, whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the straight ticket button or straight ticket box that you check, honestly, that is doing more of the shirking civic duty than the absentee ballot.
I agree.
I would say that filling out your ballot absentee with like you were saying, less pressure could actually help people's chances of actually doing a little bit of research, whereas straight ticket, you don't even have to think about it. Just check the box for Democrat, check the box for Republican. And generally, those are the only 2 options. So,
I can see that perspective, but I don't think that we should reduce the quote unquote pressure, as you said it. I call it responsibility, but whatever you want to call it, we're talking about that same feeling. I don't think we should reduce that because I think that it is an important one to have with the important duty that we're fulfilling, right? So. For example, I'm going to put it in a different context away from voting. When I was in the military, if we were going to be doing something, like we were just talking about in op, right? There's a lot less pressure when you're talking about it than any other time. Then you move on to actually training, doing drills and stuff. At that point, you should be putting that pressure on yourself to take it seriously, because obviously the next step is bad stuff, right? But that pressure should be there in order to take that responsibility seriously. Otherwise, you get guys just fucking off, talking, bullshitting, which I was guilty of myself, not taking those things as seriously as they require. And when we're talking about choosing the leaders of the largest, most powerful nation the world has ever seen, I'd say it's pretty important, right?
I totally agree with that. And as somebody that ran the training program for an entire department of a Navy vessel, I totally agree with what you're saying. Talking about something in training and then doing a real scale, real time drill is totally different. When you're doing that drill, like the pressure is on, the heat of the moment is there, you have that, pressure to perform. So I do understand what you're saying from that point, but I do think voting is a little bit...
I don't think I clarified this, so I just want to be clear for that analogy there. I was talking about training was the mail-in ballot, and the actual training for combat was the voting in person.
Yep. I
just for
I picked
anyone
up on
listening that didn't know that.
But yep, great point to clarify for the listeners. Well, I do think there is a little bit of a distinction there, but I totally agree with the fact that the pressure is off when you're voting at home, and there is some pressure when you're voting in person. I don't necessarily think it's any added pressure based on the outcome of the election. I think it's more environmental factors based on the amount of people that are around. You know, you have the election clerks in front of you. You have that secrecy blind or curtain around you.
Trifold board.
So it does, add some pressure. But like I was saying, I think removing some of that pressure can also help. The pressure both of the environment and timing can help you with a little bit of clarity of thought, but I can also see, if you just have it at home, like filling it out real quick and dropping it in the mail. But I tend to
thinks that.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So there's another part of me that also thinks that hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of good men and women have died for me to have the right to do this. The least I can do is get off my ass and go up there and do it, right? That's another portion of it to me. I think that kind of sounds a little pompous when I say it out loud.
No. I totally agree. And if I can cut in real quick, there was another note that I had here that was that one of the proposed solutions to alleviating election day lines and the fact that it can take people an undue amount of time and stress to go vote on election day is to combine election day with Veterans Day and call it election day or democracy day. Something which I think you and I both probably oppose inherently as veterans, but that was just one of the proposed solutions. The other one was to make it a 4-day weekend with Veterans Day followed by Election Day or Democracy Day. So you would have a 4-day weekend with that fourth day being the day that you would cast your ballot. So I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I am opposed to, kind of watering down Veterans Day because I think that is, just as much of a slap in the face as watering down, say, Memorial Day or the 4th of July.
I agree.
So, but yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about early or absentee voting?
No, not particularly. I've kind of already moved slightly towards our open portion. But one thing I wanted to touch back on when we were talking about voting down ticket, one position that when it's up I think is the most important one on the ballot for the individual, and this is also the one that I know if you don't know who it is in your area, you don't take politics seriously. And that is your local sheriff. Your local sheriff has the most consequential effect on your life, in my opinion, as an individual, right? We will likely never meet our state senator, our national senator, our president, any of that. But there's a very real possibility that you will meet your sheriff. And there's a very real possibility that if so sheriffs have a tremendous amount of power that a lot of people don't realize in America, when they can decide which laws they will and will not enforce.
I totally agree. And I actually, it's funny that you bring it up. One of my potential upcoming topics was about constitutional sheriffs and kind of that entire line of thought I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's a little bit wild. Some of the thoughts on the power that sheriffs have.
No, so I think sheriffs should have a lot of power. I think a sheriff should have more power than any other municipal police executive, mainly because they are elected by the people and they are held accountable by the people. Another thing that I think the sheriffs really, the system of having sheriffs is really good for, is it allows communities to put in place someone that will enforce the laws that they think are important to enforce. And what I really mean by this is that there's a lot of laws on the books. I think you and I both agree that legality does not equate to morality.
Yes, that's true, and I do agree that your sheriff should choose, kind of which laws they target and which ones they think are more important to the community, which ones they're sending those deputies out to really look for. I think that's really their job, honestly.
I 100% agree. And this is another spot where I think that the sanctuary city laws should have come from. I don't think they should have been city laws passed by cities. I think they should have been enforcement chosen by sheriffs, right? It's really difficult to hold an entire city council accountable at one time, whereas a sheriff you can hold accountable right now, right? But I also think the things, back to what I was saying earlier, I think that sheriffs are really good at enforcing the morality of the people, right? So, for example, before marijuana was legalized in Michigan, there were sheriffs that would not enforce marijuana laws, right? Where they wouldn't arrest people for petty possession, things like that. I'm sure everyone knows the stories of when their dad was a kid or where their granddad was a kid, where they got caught with a joint, a doobie of that marijuana, and the cop just made them step on it and whatever. Those are examples of things that sheriffs can do that other law enforcement officers cannot do, because sheriffs get to have that decision-making leeway. So that's an office that I think everyone needs to be very conscious of. And again, if I'm talking to someone that, oh yeah, I'm really into politics, and I'm like, all right, who's your sheriff? And you don't know, that's kind of foolish to me, right? Your congressman's not going to pull you over and pull you out of the car and send you to jail. Your sheriff will. And your congressman is not responsible for the conditions inside the jailhouse. Your sheriff is. All of these things, right? So
yeah, I will say I also feel pretty strongly about this, as evidenced by what I was saying about a potential upcoming topic. We do have a sheriff near me, not in my district, but very close, that has been I'll say wrapped up in some of these election conspiracies, and has been on the record some sheriff's campaigns talking about basically that he has the right to shut down polling stations if he thinks that there's a bunch of fraud present.
That's not how that works.
I totally agree, and I think having a whole episode about this entire line of thought about constitutional sheriffs is a pretty interesting deep dive that we can do.
Yeah.
And
I do think there's times where sheriffs should be able to shut down a polling location, but I don't think it's fraud. I think it's like
for public safety
inside the polling location.
Yeah, exactly. You know public safety.
There's an active shooter. But
no, I totally
fraud,
agree.
No,
but yeah, if they think that there's potential fraud and they just shut it down for the entire day, that's just
that's a violation
overreach
of civil liberties.
Exactly. So
it is incentive for cowboys.
Yeah, exactly. Which I would argue that this particular person is and wants to be a cowboy, kind of one of those Yellowstone type sheriffs. But
the romantic sheriff.
I mean, yeah, you could call it that. Like, one of those classic American Old West wannabe kind of sheriff. Yep. But anyway, so we're about an hour in. So I do want to get to a little bit of state of the race. So I know we have talked about several times that we both use different polling metrics and kind of follow different things. One thing that I think is interesting is that the polling in the very last week of the election tends to be the most accurate. However, you do still have that margin of error. So your wild fluctuations kind of tend to collapse. And from what I can tell, it is a very, very tight race.
So the really interesting thing that I think we need to talk about polls that we haven't yet is with the changes to the early voting and with the record-breaking amounts of early voting that we have, polling is pretty much ineffective. And I say that because you don't know what percentage of that early vote voted which way, right? So you're going to have, like every year, you're going to have registered Democrats that vote Republican and registered Republicans that vote Democrat and registered independents that vote. You don't know how they're going to vote, right? So we don't know if... So, of course, the Republican Party right now is having a massive influx of both voter registration and early voting compared to the last multiple years, right?
Yes.
So a lot of people are saying that that's why it looks like the Republicans are going to win, because look how many people voted early. Like, well, yes, but also, how many of those people would have voted day of regardless, and they just voted early for convenience, opposed to how many people voted early or absentee that were not going to vote because it was too difficult or whatever. It was too inconvenient to go to the polls. So we really don't know what that percentage is because we've never seen something to this scale. So I just say that to say we got to take all these polls with a grain of salt, and anyone that tells you they know definitively who's going to win is full of shit. So I think that's pretty widely agreed upon thing within most political media that I've watched. I think pretty much everyone agrees with that that I've seen. I'm sure you could find exclusions, you know. Actually, no, I don't know if I've heard Tucker say that explicitly. I know he's pretty confident Trump's going to win, but I like Tucker, but he's also kind of an ass. So there's that.
Yeah, I haven't seen any really reputable sources call the election one way or another based on polling, which I think is fair based on the way all of these swing states are shaking out. What I have here is from 270 to win, national, Harris up by 1.2 within margin of error. Georgia.
Where do you see that on this one? I've never been able to find that on this.
So if you just go to the 270 to win website,
I'm on it.
The national is displayed first. When you go to 2024 presidential election polls, you'll see just kind of a pie chart of percentages of the last however many averages of polls.
You're gonna have to show me this off mic, because I'm just seeing a map of the interactive map.
Yeah, so I can send it to you quickly here, but basically what I'm saying is Georgia to Trump 1.7% within margin of error. Michigan 1.8 to Harris within margin of error, which is a pretty big swing from what we've seen recently. Nevada.
No, she's been polling 1.0 plus for like the last week, as far as what I've seen.
Yeah, I just think based on the last few discussions that we've had, it's been back and forth.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Nevada within 1% to Trump. Pennsylvania dead even. North Carolina 1.5 to Trump. Wisconsin 1% to Harris.
So one thing I want to point out real quick on a couple of these.
Those are kind of the big swing states there. I don't did I mention Arizona? Arizona Trump 1.5%. So that is the 270 to win. But go ahead.
Yeah. So a lot of these I'm seeing is just a couple of polls. Most of them actually. I only including a few polls, right? They're not like, for example, the Arizona one has an average of 12 polls. I bet that one's going to be a little more accurate than, for example, any of the mains, which are just 2 polls being used. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find another swing state real quick.
I do think I agree with you there. I tend to overlook the states that are pretty heavy for one candidate or the other. I don't even really look at them because, for instance, Wyoming is probably going to go to Trump by a wide margin. Florida is going to be pretty close, but almost definitively for Trump. Same with South Carolina, Utah, Nebraska.
I understand the guarantees.
And then, like your New Yorks, Californias, Washingtons, Oregons, those are all going to, fall squarely within the Harris camp there. So I
think they need to alphabetize these.
Yeah, I think they have it organized by swing state somehow.
Oh, they have it organized by date.
Okay. If it's by date updated, I bet swing state is a pretty good a pretty good indicator of who comes first. But
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you in. Keep going.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to jump to a couple of other states I was looking at. Some of the swing states that I'm looking at according to 538, look at Nevada, Trump plus 0.3, Pennsylvania plus 0.3 to Trump, Wisconsin plus 0.8 for Harris, Michigan 1.1 to Harris, and then North Carolina 1.5 Trump, Georgia 1.8 Trump, Arizona 2.1 Trump. Those are the main swings. And then moving over into my preferred poll, just because, to be honest with you, the HUD is way better than the other two. And also it tends to have, at least from what I've seen, more polls included. And that could fuck up your numbers, right? If you include outliers that shouldn't be included. Just because it has more doesn't necessarily mean it's better. But I just like to see more data and let myself sift through it. So I'm going to go through a couple right now just so we can have an idea for this one. So for national, RCP is calling the popular for Trump at plus 0.3. For Arizona, they're calling it for Trump plus 2.3. Nevada is Trump plus 1.5. Wisconsin is Harris plus 0.3. Michigan is Harris plus 0.8. Pennsylvania is Trump plus 0.4. North Carolina is Trump plus 1.5. Georgia is Trump plus 2.6. And that's most of them that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting about Georgia and a couple of those others. Most of what I'm hearing between all three of those polls, I also follow 538. Almost every swing state is within the margin of error. Georgia, on your poll was a lot more definitively towards Trump, and it very well could be, kind of a difference between the last election and this election for door-to-door and kind of grassroots efforts in Georgia. I know it was a pretty big effort that sent Georgia to Biden in the last election. So I would not be surprised if Donald Trump edges out Kamala Harris one more time in that.
Yeah, I also think that Trump has put a lot of effort into Georgia and Arizona specifically. I know he's been putting that effort in pretty much since he declared. I know he's also been putting a lot of effort into Michigan, Pennsylvania as well. So we'll have to see how that works out.
I have a feeling at this point that Pennsylvania and Michigan are going to both go to Harris. Despite the best efforts of the other side, but go ahead.
I disagree with you. So of the blue wall, which is really what it comes down to, right? I don't think this is going to be a year where all three vote in unison. I think that Wisconsin and Michigan go Harris, and Pennsylvania goes Trump, and really, we're all talking about gut feelings, right? At this point, there is no definitive way to know. All the polling is tied, essentially, or within margin of error, so effectively tied. The big thing that I think is going to hurt Harris in this election, that shouldn't have hurt her, but I think she made a horrible choice earlier, was passing on Josh Shapiro. I think that a lot of Pennsylvanians, that and her fracking policy in the past, I don't think they're buying her rebrand on, oh no, fracking's good now. I just don't see that happening. I also think that a lot of people in Pennsylvania took it as an affront to them that they didn't pick Shapiro. Whether or not it was for the reasons that people believed it was, people still believe that it was because of his religion, and for the Muslim vote in Michigan, that demographic in Dearborn. So I think for those reasons, Pennsylvania's going to go Trump, and I don't think Michigan's going Trump, and I don't think Wisconsin will either. I could be wrong, but
yeah, that's potentially true, and I have seen a pretty good amount of people talking about how they have received text messages or flyers from, presumably the Kamala Harris campaign, talking about radically different policies depending on what their last name is or where they are in a specific region. This could be fringing on conspiracy theory, but people are tying it to PACs backed by Elon Musk, that in Dearborn and those type of places where there's a very large Muslim population, and I do a lot of work in Dearborn, and I will tell you, when you drive down certain streets, the neighborhood is predominantly Muslim, and you can tell just when you're driving through and talking to the people there. Those people are getting text messages, calls, and flyers that are saying that Kamala Harris is in support of Israel, and then people outside of that, people in like Ann Arbor, people where there's a much bigger Jewish population, or people sympathetic to the Jewish cause, those people are getting those calls, texts, and flyers that are saying that she is in support of Palestine.
I think Israel. I think that's being done on both sides. I'm getting multiple texts from both parties saying conflicting news from both candidates. That's just run-of-the-mill campaigning, in my opinion.
No, I do see what you're saying, but it's almost like a false flag kind of campaign,
I feel like both campaigns have been running that this whole time, though. So I don't think that's an outlier, or
honestly,
an indicator of anything.
Honestly, I would like to see that shut down and outlawed federally for both sides. I think that's super shitty. I don't think you should be able to claim that you are supporting one candidate as a spoiler, basically. I think that's
agree
totally
with you, but I think
immoral
a lot
and
of electoral. I think there's a lot of electoral reform we need, but I don't think any of it's going to happen.
Oh man,
I do.
Jeez, we could talk about this forever, but
yeah, let's not, because we're already running running a good time. We still got a little bit, but we don't want to go too far over, right? So on the Dearborn thing, I think that she's already going to have an issue with that. I think the biggest indicator of that was the uncommitted vote for Biden and his policy in Israel, and she has continued that lockstep, that policy for Israel. I think she's done some lip service, but I don't think that amount of lip service has quelled the issues within the issues that the Muslim community has with her as far as that issue goes. So I think a lot of them are either going to stay home or vote elsewhere. Whether that's with Trump, I don't think so, because he's, in my opinion, the most pro-Israel president that we've had in a long time, if not ever. So I don't see them going to him, but I also don't know that they're going to go with Harris either, because I think they're starting to get frustrated with the Democratic Party as far as that topic goes.
Yeah, I do think that that both the Democratic and Republican parties are both very pro-Israel in a way that I don't think a lot of these people that are all riled up about Palestine like very much. Even some very prominent Jewish voices are saying, like, hey, you don't have to give your 100% sympathetic backing to Israel. You can support the fact that Jews should exist and should have, a homeland to go back to, but you don't have to support what they're doing at all times. And I was very surprised to see that Kamala Harris had 100% backed Israel, even if she was a little bit flaky on a little bit of policy.
I think that was generous of you.
Well, what I'm saying is that she stood behind her support for Israel, no matter what questions were basically being asked of her, as long as they weren't about humanitarian and war crimes.
So the reason I disagree
saying
with that,
like, hey, we don't support war crimes or humanitarian crisis at all, regardless of who it's from. But we stand behind Israel.
So I don't see her lip service as support to Israel at all, to be honest with you. Anytime she ever says anything even remotely close to "I support Israel," it's always followed with, "But I think she says everything short of the genocide word, right? And I think the facts of the matter on this military act, I'm sure I've discussed with you the history of this and why I don't necessarily think this is the best conflict for Israel to say that the moral
high ground,
leader,
basically.
Yeah, moral high ground.
Yeah, and I totally,
as far as why it started. But what I will say is that they have had the cleanest war in a densely populated urban area that the world has ever seen, bar none. They have a lower civilian to militant kill ratio than any other country, to include ourselves in Iraq and Afghanistan, or any other urban conflict in the world, including Ukraine, that's happening in a parallel time frame. So with her still saying that is occurring and that what they're doing is abhorrent, I agree the number of children dead is a problem. and we need to do our best to rectify that. She's also said that they're not sending enough aid. They've sent more aid to the Gaza Strip in this conflict than any other nation. Never before in history has the nation that has had the act of violence perpetrated against them been required to ship humanitarian aid to the war zone while the war is active. It's just never happened before. So for them to be held to that account by her is not backing Israel, in my opinion. I think that's just not true. And I'm not saying that Trump's a perfect backer either, but I don't think you can make those caveats and still say that you support Israel, because I think it's very similar with a lot of the times you say but. It really just throws away everything behind that but, right? Not all the time, but I think a lot of the time it does. And in this case, I think it does as well. I think she's paying lip service to it for the donors.
What I will say here, just and I don't mean to cut you off necessarily, but I do want to make one thing clear. So I can't speak to those statistics. I haven't researched that in particular, and we don't do gotchas or anything like that here. So don't the listeners at home don't take this as me conceding or not being well enough informed on this issue. Don't just think that I'm taking this as a loss because I can't necessarily respond to those specific statistics. But he is obviously very well researched on his side. I have not brought that same research to the table here for this specific episode. Perhaps we'll talk about it someday in the future. But I do want to say that if you think about it from the other side of the table, and people who are in support of Palestine, Kamala Harris's support of Israel, even though she's saying we generally condemn acts of war crimes and all of these humanitarian things, but we support Israel without question. That is basically the opposite of what they stand for. So personally, I don't have any skin in this game. I'm just an outside viewer, so I can't say from one side or the other that I'm totally on board without question. I'm an outside observer, so all I can say about this crisis is what I see and what I hear, and I try not to make any really strong remarks for either side based on that, because I don't understand the full picture. I know the history to an extent. I know what's been coming out. I see all of these statistics and these news stories, but I know well enough that I don't know the entirety of what's going on. So, all of those things that Drew said could very well be true, and there could very well be more to the story beyond that. There could be, more to, the Palestine side. But one thing I do want to make clear is that neither one of us, Drew or I, support Hamas as a terrorist organization.
No, not at all.
And I think we've also talked about that in previous episodes. Hamas as an organization, regardless of what you think about their potential motives based on the Palestinian situation, they are a terrorist organization, and they are not going about this in a way that anybody would think is acceptable in a diplomatic stance. So Yeah, that was a little bit of a rant, off topic, but I'll kick it back to you for follow up there.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too far into it. I think a lot of what that was a diplomacy explanation, which I'm fine with. As far as diplomacy between us, I'm okay with that. I do just want to touch on the ratios right now. And the problem with the Gaza conflict right now is who you get reporting from. Obviously, I don't think we can trust the Gaza Ministry of Health, seeing as they're run by Hamas, which is the terrorist organization in and of itself. So I think that their numbers are kind of out the window, I think it's fair to say. Which, according to those numbers, it's 1 to 8 is the ratio, which is just categorically untrue. Obviously, they're not going to list their fighters as combatants any more than they absolutely have to. And so they're going to say a lot of them are civilians, even though anyone that's familiar at all with urban warfare and guerrilla warfare knows that combatants often hide in civilian capacities and civilian areas, dressed as civilians outside of traditional military uniform, which is a war crime. I would like to state again.
You can also skew the numbers by, talking about support personnel and all of that kind of stuff. So
100%. So what I'm seeing online is saying Israel has anywhere between 1 to 1 to 1 to 1.5 ratio, where in Iraq we were way worse. So for example, I'm going to read just the numbers off to you. Overall figures in the numbers, just from what I'm seeing right now, was that we killed, as of March of 2013, there was 174,000 casualties in Iraq, which is us and our allies, killing people, and only 39,900, so 40,000 of that 174,000 were combatants. So if what Israel is doing is considered a genocide, then what we did in Iraq is also a genocide.
Yeah,
just by the numbers.
I think I have some pretty strong feelings about, Operation Desert Storm, specifically, as well as Desert Shield, but Desert Storm more so, and that's a totally separate topic. But yeah. I think
I think we both agree it was bad.
Going to war with the entirety of the country of Iraq, based on the 9/11 attacks, was way beyond what I would call a
proportional.
Proportional or measured retaliation. So,
who was the architect of that war, out of curiosity, Mike?
Well, I think what you're getting at is Dick Cheney and George W. Bush.
Yep.
So if you're going to say that Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris, I would counter that with the general sentiment that most people that support Kamala Harris reject the entire premise that Dick Cheney came out in support of her. But that's
how do you reject the premise when he did? That doesn't make any sense.
That is just what I have.
It's like saying I don't believe in taxes. They're still real.
No, that's true. But
when the warmongers are supporting you, I think that says something about your position.
Yeah.
Just like I thought the Republicans were bad when those warmongers were on this side.
Potentially, but you can also support a candidate without, supporting every single thing that they stand for as
100%. Let me ask you this: what was the primary thing that Dick Cheney stood for? He was a neocon. That his entire purpose was to fuel the military-industrial complex and project American strength for American interest. Right? Do you think that's a fair summation of what Dick Cheney's whole thing was?
I mean, that's definitely one portion of his foreign policy, yes.
That was the largest, most influential portion of his policy. He wasn't digging wells in Haiti, right?
Yeah.
So
I would
that
say
guy's main thing,
that was true of the time. Both Democrats and Republicans, kind of both wanted to do that.
But I shackle Republicans with most of that for that time period. I think
true.
that was mostly their thing, and I think it was horrible. And it's one thing I deplored about the Republican Party, especially now, and even at the time I did. To be completely honest and transparent with our viewership, though, I have had a shift in my foreign policy hawkishness. I used to be much more hawkish than I am now. Because I bought into the romantic idea of war. As a teenage boy, I don't think that's particularly abnormal. But I digress. Back to the point at hand.
No, and I will say that I don't think that America should be getting involved in other people's governmental business. I think that was one giant misstep that we had been making throughout the Cold War and up until now, and
the only one I can even remotely see argument for is the Korean War. Only barely.
I don't think that we should be isolationist in our entirety, but we should enforce. We don't necessarily have to be the police force of the entire world, as those neocons, as you were talking about, wanted us to be. But
yes,
we should get involved when our allies need us to. But I don't think we should be sending troops, boots on the ground, unless we are, provoked in some way, or one of our allies is directly invaded, something like that.
I think the biggest one is we need to stop giving people what is it? No holds barred
weapons funds,
defense guarantees. Yep. No, just defense guarantees. I think that's a big problem with Ukraine. Is that we pretty much said we'll take care of you no matter what, and that's been Biden's policy this entire time, and that has really inhibited a desire within Ukraine to want to negotiate. If you got the biggest guy in the block willing to punch your bully in the face, you're going to start talking shit, right? You're going to start making the problem worse.
I think part of that is also based on the court of public opinion, right? So the majority of Americans, especially when this whole thing started, were totally in support of Ukraine.
True. However,
and against
Russia.
A
lot of the media coverage of that was I would argue propagandized in a way that made people feel that way and still make people feel that way.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't understand a lot of the background politics of what's been going on in Ukraine for the last 20 years. And that was evident by when the Ukraine invasion started. All of the major media, to include both sides of the aisle, all continuously said an unprovoked invasion. And if you know anything about Ukrainian, Russian, Soviet history, you know that's just empirically untrue.
Now,
yet they said it anyway.
When you're saying unprovoked and saying empirically untrue, I think you can argue that from the other side as well. As you and I have talked about offline several times, there was, agreements that took away Ukrainian nuclear weapons in exchange 100%. In exchange for non-aggression and protection treaties, and that was not held up. You can talk about the corruption in the Ukrainian government,
which I would.
Yep, and there was also a previous annexation of Ukrainian soil before this whole invasion even started. So,
who was president when that happened?
All right, now we're getting into some gotchas.
I apologize. Yeah,
and
no, I heard it as I said it. I apologize.
We've already talked about
that was Barack Obama.
We've already talked about that offline, and it wasn't necessarily like anything that was particularly started by a U.S. president or U.S. politics, but
I think this one
there are some
really
things
was.
Have some optics potentially.
This is something that I do want to say before the election. Obviously, I know you already voted, so I'm not changing your opinion. And the odds that I'm going to change anyone's opinion based on our viewership numbers is pretty slim. But 2 days. So for the past, 20 years, roughly. Don't quote me on that number. Roughly 20 years. Vladimir Putin has been saying that his red line that would cause him to go to war would be an expansion of NATO to the borders of Russia, specifically Ukraine. And the reason for that is, I think, primarily the deep water port there, as well as the natural resources of fertile soil and their capacity to grow so much food that the Russian military would need, and so on and so forth, whatever. However, he's been saying it for 20 years that Ukraine is a red line. Then America keeps saying for the last 5 years or so that they want Ukraine and NATO. And then fast forward, Kamala Harris is at the Munich Security Council and almost explicitly says that Ukraine will be part of NATO. And then 2 days later, Russia invades Ukraine. So I don't think that we as Americans, regardless of what I think about Kamala Harris, when the Vice President of the United States, the strongest country in the world, says, hey, we're going to go and we're going to bring NATO, the North Atlantic Trade Organization, who was solely set up to defend against the expansion of the Soviet Union's power. That's why it was set up. We're going to expand that all the way across countries well inland, nowhere near the near the Atlantic Ocean, up to the borders of Russia. That's provocation.
Right. I think what you're leaving out there is that Ukraine has been in talks with NATO since I want to say 2 years after they ratified their constitution to make a, not necessarily a treaty, but to have peaceful talks with NATO and peaceful talks with Russia, right? They wanted to be an impartial player
Correct.
in this. And then after the annexation of Crimea, they made it a part of their constitution that they would seek NATO membership because of that renege on the agreement to disarm Ukraine. So that's a big thing that I think that especially the right-wing talking point about the Ukraine war and the provocation fails to talk about. Is that
So I think both things can be true at the same time.
It totally can, and they are obviously they are, and that's what we're trying to get at here is like there is a middle ground, right? And it's very complicated.
So let me be clear for anyone who may be listening. I am not in lockstep with the Republican Party on this. I am not part of... I do not agree with them. I tend to be much more anti-war than the Republican Party is. I think that we very easily, could have come to a diplomatic solution before anything like that ever happened.
Yes, absolutely.
And us going there and sending our Vice President of the United States over to a Security Council in Europe, surrounded by the other European nations and our allies, and saying, we are going to... forget the word she actually said.
So, hold on.
We're going to cross the red line of the Russian people.
Let me get you with a gotcha here. How many days
Go ahead.
before the invasion did you say that happened?
I think it was like 2 days.
And how many days had the Russian forces been amassing on the Ukraine border?
Oh, they've been amassing there for months, I think.
Months? Okay, so right there, what you're telling me is that that Russia was already prepared for an invasion, and ostensibly,
Could we not have had a diplomatic solution by that point?
Vice President Harris was saying, we support Ukraine being part of NATO as a show of support for Ukraine as a defense mechanism to prevent a Russian invasion that the CIA and other intelligence agencies had already said is a work in progress. They are going to invade Ukraine. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Ukraine.
so absolutely they're a mass on the border, because we had already been saying things along this nature about considering their involvement in NATO well before she went and almost guaranteed their involvement in NATO. So this further proves my point, is that we have been talking about this for a while. This was a lead-up effect. I'm not saying that Kamala Harris went of her own volition 2 days before the invasion. It's like, you know what? I think Ukraine should be part of NATO.
No,
and then
actually,
Russia just sent all their people and started doing it. Right? I don't think that's the case.
Even though you said that proves your point, I think it actually proves my point by saying that after the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine was looking for shelter and safety from the aggression of Russia. Right?
Sure.
And now they're upset that other countries are getting on board with that, but. I don't want to cut you off, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond, but I do want to respect our time period. So
absolutely.
Go ahead and give a rebuttal, and maybe I'll say something after that as well.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take a quick 2 minutes here, if possible, for me to reel it in. So I think what you're saying is accurate. I think what we're both saying is factually accurate according to timeline. However, I think the biggest provocation that we did was saying that we were definitively going to cross that line, right? Saying that we are going to allow Ukraine into NATO. As soon as Ukraine is in NATO, we can start putting NATO armaments, typically long-range ballistic missiles, on the border of the Russian territory. Now, if that happens to America, we retaliate immediately with overwhelming force. Now, this process took a matter of years, right? Annexation of Crimea, it really goes further back than that, but that's the most relevant time frame now. So we have been talking this talking point for the better part of a decade, if not more, that this was our overall long-term goal, was to include them in this. So it makes sense that Russia, as we start to get more and more serious on that, starts to move troops towards Ukraine. Obviously, when they invaded, it was right before the mud season, so they knew if a move was going to be made, strategically speaking, it would be wise of us to make it right before the mud season, so that the logistic train going from the Russian strongholds over towards the border of Ukraine took longer, which it did, and got us time to reinforce the area, which we did. So I think from a strategic standpoint, both sides did what they were supposed to do. However, at the end of the day, I think that it was the United States' fault for starting this conflict in Ukraine, and I think that it's our responsibility at this point to push for diplomatic solutions and stop saying that we will support Ukraine until they say otherwise. I am fervently against donating United States taxpayer dollars to a cause up until a foreign nation decides that's enough. I'm not okay with that.
Now, I do agree with what you're saying about taxpayer dollars. I do think that we need a solution. We can't just keep writing blank checks for a foreign proxy conflict, right? But going back to what you were saying about President Barack Obama and his relations with Ukraine and Russia, in that same meeting that you were referencing earlier, he was essentially extending an olive branch to Russia to say, hey, if you collaborate with us to join this European missile defense network, and we all place, missile defense systems around Europe, and we all defend each other, like, this is what we want to do. We will be more lenient with you, I think, is what the terminology
more flexible
was.
After the election was his exact quote. after election is important in this
right,
context.
and to give a little bit more context, that was while he was up for re-election, right? So he can't make any promises unless he is re-elected, right? So let's say to think about it from one side, if I am re-elected, we will do these types of things with you. I can't necessarily make promises for the other party.
So I will need to push back on that.
We will be more lenient on you defending your foreign or your national interests if you join this coalition of European defense.
Actually, let's change my mind. I'm not going to push back too much. I'm not going to. I think we can do a whole episode on Ukraine. I do want to say that when you said you're supporting Obama by saying he couldn't do anything before the election, that was in March when he said that. The election wasn't until November. He definitely could have gotten some foreign policy issue resolved in that number of months. But again,
I do want to say that
this topic further down the line,
that Vladimir Putin was also about to be transitioned into the Russian presidency, so it was also a period of transition for Russia's politics as well. So that also adds another layer of complexity to the political spectrum there. So I tend to not see it as a conspiracy theory more than just a kind of a, hey, let's work together after this whole election thing shakes out, if I am lucky enough to still be in office. But that's just my personal viewpoint. I am an optimist for full disclosure.
I tend not to be, for full disclosure.
And I think that's probably pretty clear to anybody that's listened to every episode. Although, I don't think there are many of those people yet, but if in the future you've made it this far, you can probably tell.
I just tend to not think that politicians, people that are drawn to politics, are empirically good. Or I tend to think they're more liars than almost anyone else in society. So I don't feel like I'm required to give them the benefit of the doubt. But that's just my stance on it. I tend to be wary of politicians. So
yeah, that's true. I also am as well. Even though I'm an optimist, I do think that
I think you tend to give them more of the benefit than I do.
Politicians do attract a certain type, especially a certain type that's backed by billionaires, which every single one of them are.
At least at a national level. I don't think my local treasurer is got millionaire backers.
Exactly. So
we say all that to say go vote. Pick your favorite liar, and we'll see you guys back next time, this time after the election. So, Mike, if you don't mind, I'm going to end it the same way we always do, unless you got some closings.
Nope.
Alrighty. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Mike, I love you, buddy.
I love you too. And
Until
we'll
next time,
see you
everybody.
guys
Thanks for
all
joining
next
us.
time.